Okay, ready to go. So we'll make uh we'll make this morning the last formal session anyway on these Greek participles because I think we've had enough of all this grammar stuff. But it's kind of funny since we started talking about these things, how much more I'm noticing them in my own studies. I'm seeing, man, there's participles everywhere in Greek. It's really I don't think I realized or remember just how prevalent, how frequent they are. And so, honestly, the time we've spent looking at these things, I think will be of great benefit to you as you're going into your study and looking at, as you get into interlinear, and you'll notice these participles popping up everywhere, and not just the sort of the typical ones that modify verbs or nouns, but even these other specialized ones that we've been talking about. And we'll get to. I think we just have one more type of participle we have to look at today. And just by way of review on these guys, um, Greek participles again can function like the English counterparts, the ones that in English participles modify adjective verbs or nouns, and certainly the Greek participle does that. But additionally, there are other ways that it functions. It can also function like a noun or a verb. And in fact, we'll see quite often they function as nouns. Another aspect too in Greek participles is because they do have a verbal component, they have tenses that in English it's a little bit harder to see. Normally you need helping words like having been born or something like that gives an idea of tense in English. But in Greek, the tenses are more explicit and more direct. It's easier to identify them and identify their function, which is really helpful. So to do that, just by way of reminder again, that we have these 6 Greek verb tenses that you are going to encounter. Present, which is ongoing action in the present typically. Sometimes it can be a singular event in the present, but more often it functions. Present tense verbs in Greek are ongoing action in the present. Imperfect verbs are sort of the present tense counterpart. They are ongoing action in the past. So you think of present and imperfect are kind of like sisters. Present is in the current, in the now time frame, whereas imperfect is ongoing action in an earlier time frame. The aorist tense, again, generally speaking, is action in the past. It can refer to a singular event or to a general occurrence, even an ongoing action in the past. But generally speaking, it refers to an event and is often translated in the past tense in English. Future tense is probably one of the easiest ones in Greek to understand. It's an event in the future. And again, it can be an ongoing event, it can be a general event, or it can be a specific event. And then we have those perfect and pluperfect tenses, which are a very interesting tense in Greek. Both refer to an action in the past, but the perfect tense has results from that action that still occur in the present. Whereas the pluperfect is action in the past, but the results are also in the past. Okay, and so that can be really helpful. There's only 80-something pluperfect uses of the pluperfect in Greek, so you won't encounter that very often. But when you do, pay attention to that, because that's telling you something about the action that is involved, that it was an action in the past that had results, but those results or consequences ended in the past. But the perfect tense in Greek is action in the past that have results in the present. Very important distinction. Another thing to keep in mind as well is the perfect tense in Greek is different than the perfect tense in Hebrew. We really haven't talked much about Hebrew, because you not only, if we did that, you'd not only have nosebleeds, you'd have ear bleeds as well. So I'm trying to keep you from having your head explode, because the Hebrew grammar is quite a bit different when it comes to verbs. There are participles in Hebrew, and they emphasize an ongoing action, but they do function a little differently, quite differently than in Greek. And then as well for the perfect tense. In Hebrew, there's only two tenses, which are called imperfect and perfect. And unfortunately, I don't know why grammarians do this, but the imperfect tense in Hebrew is different than the imperfect tense in Greek. The imperfect tense in Hebrew generally refers to ongoing action and normally is translated in the present tense in English, whereas imperfect in Greek is referring to ongoing action in the past. The perfect tense in Hebrew refers to normally the idea of a completed event. So it is typically an event that takes place in the past, but it's not like the Greek tense, which has action in the past with results in the present. So we have to be careful we don't mix in our understanding of these verb tenses when we look at Greek or Hebrew or even English. The English perfect has some differences.
Yeah.
Normally, an English perfect is simply more of an action that took place in the past. Having been born, as I said, something like that, or he had been born. So be careful with this. These tenses may have the same names in different languages, but that doesn't mean they function the same in each language. So if you hear somebody say, this is a perfect tense in Hebrew, don't be thinking Greek, all right? It's not the same. Let me write this down here. Okay, so maybe in the future we might talk more about Hebrew, but like I said, I don't want you to be bleeding from every hole in your head, from all the pressure that your brain will be under. But I just want to at least have you have that in mind. So if you're looking at an interlinear of an Old Testament passage, you're now in a different arena. And so, but if you do see a participle in a Hebrew text, it says participle, it does have a similar idea as an English participle. It will be emphasizing an ongoing action, unless you are looking at an Aramaic passage, and there it's different. In Aramaic, participles most often act like regular verbs. So, thankfully, though, there's not that many Aramaic texts in the Old Testament, just Daniel 2-7 and Ezra 4-6 are, in there. But I'm just warning you, I want you to be careful. If you're looking at those texts in Aramaic, the grammar functions a little differently than in Hebrew. The words, the definitions of the words in Aramaic are very similar to the same word in Hebrew, but the way the grammar works, there are some differences, and participles is a big one. There's a big difference between a Hebrew participle and an Aramaic participle. Okay, so again, just some warning flags for you to consider and be aware of if you dig into Old Testament passages. Okay. But our focus has been on Greek because, and my main reason for that is because normally with diagramming, it's the most helpful tool with epistles, right? With didactic instructional sections, with epistles or with instructional passages like in narratives, when you come across, a sermon in a narrative, or you come across instructional teaching like from Jesus or something like that, then a diagram can be helpful in any instructional passage. But most of that takes place in the epistles and then in some places in the Gospels, which again are in Greek. So that's why I focused our attention on the Greek participles for us. Okay. All right. All that said, any questions on that? My goal here is just for you to have awareness of there are differences between the three biblical languages when it comes to participles and when it comes to verb tenses. And in fact, in Hebrew, we shouldn't use the term tense. Hebrew isn't so much about like in English, English is structured around tense, around time. Hebrew, not so much. Hebrew is more about aspects. It looks at action in two ways. It looks at action either internally or externally. And so an imperfect tense has this idea of you're looking at the action. Hebrew scholars call it in an internal way, whereas the perfect tense looks at an action more from an external point of view. The simple idea is completed action versus incomplete action. The imperfect tense often refers to incomplete action. The perfect tense refers to complete action. But you can have an imperfect tense in Hebrew translated in the present or in the past or in the future. And the perfect tense can be translated in the past, present, or future. Normally past tense, but not always. And in fact, in prophecy, it's often in the perfect tense, but it's referring to future events. Some scholars have called that the prophetic perfect, where they often say that's translated in the past tense as if it already has happened, that prophecy is so sure. But I think, in my opinion, that's a little bit simplistic to think of it that way. But when we're looking at Hebrew, this idea of time it's a little different. And so again, that's another caution when you're in the world of the Hebrew language. And Tabs is going to help us all out when he takes this Hebrew class in seminary, and he'll be our Hebrew scholar, and he can correct everything that I'm saying wrong here. But until that point, we just want to be careful with how much we delve into the Hebrew as well. So just be a little more cautious. Be always cautious with the interlinear, but be especially cautious if you're looking at an Old Testament passage. All right, that's the moral of this of this story, so to speak. All right. Okay. Any questions before we dive back into the participles? Okay. Let's talk Greek participles. As I've already said, they function in essentially 4 different ways in Greek. They function as adverbs, which again modify verbs. They function as adjectives, which modifies nouns, and they can function as nouns, which the technical grammar term is called substantival or substantives. But basically just think of them as nouns. Substantives are a fancy way to say acts like a noun. Okay? Those are the 3 that we've looked at. The 4th one is participles can also function like regular verbs, or what we would call sometimes finite verbs. All right? Those are just verbs that describe an action and would be I guess that's the best way to put it. Just verbs that function solely describing an action. All right. Now, participles, remember, are verbals. They normally are in the form of a verb or have a verb in it, but are not strictly verbs. However, there are participles that can behave strictly like verbs. All right. So we have to be aware of that. Now, there is a marker that will tell you if this is the case. Again, grammarians love fancy terms that no one can pronounce and no one can remember. Periphrastic happens to be the fancy term that is used for participles acting like verbs. All right, just like substantival is a fancy term they use for participles acting like nouns, or adverbial for participles modifying verbs, or adjectival for participles modifying nouns. All right, but we don't have to be that fancy. Let's just look at it as far as when we talk about periphrastics, that just means a multi-word phrase, really, or words that a verb are added alongside a verb to make up the whole verb. But we're just going to talk about participles functioning as verbs. And the way we know that a participle is functioning like a verb is the presence of, right here, the verb of being. Okay, you will see the participle, And if you look in the interlinear, you will also see it matched with or connected to a verb of being. Okay, so Renee, verbs of being, what are they? Can you give me some examples in English? Make sure to unmute yourself.
Is, are, am.
Okay. Robbie mentioned a few. Is, are, am. Renee, you got any others? Oh. Did I chase? Oh, there you are. Can you hear me, Renee? Oh, maybe he's listening to some music.
Sir Rene, nakamute po kayo, Pastor. Sir Rene, nakamute po kayo.
Sorry.
You had some good tunes. You want to?
No.
Any other verbs of being that come to mind in English? Or other forms? Any come to mind? The chicken has an idea. How about let's see, what would be the future form of these? Is, are, am?
Will.
Yeah, will be.
Yeah, will be.
Then we have the become, right?
Yeah.
Became. I think this is most of them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we could say will become, but okay. So these are all verbs of being that will be. You will see in Greek, if the participle has the Greek form of one of these verbs of being, then it actually is functioning as a regular verb. And in fact, we can see this kind of similar in English, right? If you, he is working today. All right. Really, it's kind of a similar, we wouldn't say working here is a participle, right? We would say it's coupled with the verb is, so it's describing a present tense action. And by saying it this way, is working, we're actually emphasizing the ongoing present tense nature of his action. Okay, as opposed to he works today. Works is a present tense, but it's just describing, it's just describing it in a general sense. Okay, or if I say he worked today, that's past tense, right? But is working is taking this ing verb and coupling it with the verb of being, and this is now functioning as a regular verb, not as a participle. That's a similar idea that we will see in Greek. Let's look at a couple of examples here. All right. Here's one, 2 Peter, and maybe what I should do is take us to interlinear. This is 2 Peter 1. Can you guys see my the interlinear here from Bible Hub on your screen? All right. Okay, so Tabs, we'll have you. Can you identify the? Can you find the participle in this passage?
the Pastor, it's in being short-sighted.
Okay, so we have being short-sighted, and let's confirm. Yep. Is that a participle?
Yes, Pastor. Present participle active.
Okay, good.
And then having received.
Are there any others? Yeah, having
received, Pastor.
Let's check it.
Aorist participle.
There you go. Okay, so we have two participles here. Now let's ask ourselves, how are these functioning? All right. So let's look at the first one. What kind of participle is it?
Present participle active, Pastor.
Okay. And how is it functioning here? Is it modifying another? Is it functioning like an adverb, an adjective, a noun, or a verb?
Pastor, basing it on the definition you gave a while ago, I think it's functioning as a regular verb because the preceding phrase is he is, present indicative.
Yeah.
It's a verb of being, I think.
Yes.
And then it's connected to the being short-sighted.
Yes. You guys see that? This is the verb of being. All right. He is. And that'll be your clue. That word is. All right. So literally, he is being short-sighted. Okay, so yes, being short-sighted is a participle, but because it is connected to, it is introduced by a verb of being, in this case, it acts like a regular verb. He is being short-sighted, or the English translation might often say he is short-sighted. I would prefer saying he is being short-sighted because that would tell me that it is a participle here, but it's acting like a regular verb. All right. And remember, what is it about participles, especially present tense participles? What are they typically emphasizing in terms of the action? That it is what?
Ongoing.
Ongoing. Okay. I mentioned that before, I think. If you have an imperative in the present tense or a participle in the present tense, that is usually more emphasizing the ongoing nature than a regular verb that is in the present tense in Greek. Okay, not always. Again, we have to be careful. We don't put blanket rules that or say this is true every time. Well, that's not usually the case, but generally speaking, in Greek, if you have an imperative or a participle or even an infinitive, if they're in the present tense, there usually is then an emphasis on the ongoing nature. So if I have a present tense imperative, let's say I say, read your Bible. If I use the present tense, what I'm actually saying is the idea of make it your habit to be reading your Bible. Okay? That would be a present tense imperative. If it was an aorist tense imperative, and I said, read your Bible, in Greek, if it was an aorist, it would be this idea of do it right now. Urgency. Okay? So this is where I'm talking about. The tense is if you have an aorist tense imperative, it's not saying do something in the past. Read your Bible in the past. I mean, that wouldn't make sense, right? To be given a command that is in the past tense. But in Greek, aorist tense is used for imperatives or commands to emphasize an urgency. Do it now. Whereas present tense imperatives typically emphasize an ongoing nature. Make it your habit. Keep doing that. Keep reading your Bible. That idea, okay? So that's why I like to sort of keep this literal idea being short-sighted. Because if we go back to the actual translation in I think it's a New American Standard. Let me pop that up here. Anytime now. Let's try it again. There we go. Okay, notice in the New American Standard, it translates it, it says, he who lacks these qualities is short-sighted. It doesn't say is being short-sighted. I would prefer saying being short-sighted. It would show me that idea that this is a participle. So there's this ongoing nature that could be a point of emphasis by Paul here, or Peter here. So I would prefer that translation. Let's see what the other translations do just for fun. The ESV, whoever lacks these qualities is so nearsighted he is blind. That's an interesting way to put it. Huh. The NIV says he is nearsighted and blind. The Net Bible, he is blind. He is nearsighted. Wow, these are interesting. The New King James is short-sighted. The ASV, he is blind, seeing only what is near. Now, notice there, the ASV captured the participle idea, but they didn't translate it right. Tab, since this is your verse, I'm going to ask you, what's the difference between the ASV translation, where they did say, oh, look, a participle. So they translate it seeing what is near. What's the difference between that translation and, say, the New King James, he is short-sighted? What do you think?
Seeing only what is near, and then for he who lacks these things is short-sighted and the blindness. I think, Pastor, if it's compared to the one in the interlinear, it lacks the that ability to convey the action properly. The ongoing nature of the action is somehow lost because these two translations somehow only convey the it's like they're just giving a description and not giving the action itself.
Okay, that's one element. There's something else that's even more fundamental here. If it's translated this way, seeing only what is blind, what would this be modifying?
Seeing
only what is near.
It is, I think it's modifying is blind, Pastor.
Yeah. Right? It would be describing how he is blind.
Okay.
Right?
Yes, Pastor.
So that
it's not modifying
like an adverb. But is that
yes, Pastor.
Is that how this participle
No.
is actually functioning here?
No, it's modifying the one who lacks the qualities.
Yeah, but in this case, right, because the participle is acting like a regular verb, it's not modifying anything. Regular verbs don't modify, just like nouns. Nouns don't modify. Here, they actually, the American Standard Version translated this incorrectly as a participle that modifies a verb. And in reality, this participle is acting like a verb. He is being short-sighted. It's not modifying anything. It's actually describing the action that he, the subject, is doing. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, sir.
This is why it's important to pay attention to what kind of participle you have, because let's look at it as far as how would that, maybe diagramming it would help you see this a little better. All right, let's take this. By the way, here are two participles. The second participle, having forgotten, doesn't have a verb of being in front of it, and it's functioning like an adverb. It's modifying is, how he is blind. Okay, so let's take this and let's diagram this for a second. Oops. Okay, so for he, now we have who, that modifies he who lacks these qualities is blind. So my subject is he, is my verb, blind is my predicate adjective, right? He is blind. Or, oops, short-sighted. Okay? How is he blind or short-sighted? So this will be modifying is. Oh, I should have done it this way. Okay? So he, and I'll put a little line in here for help guide our eye. Right, here's the sentence. He is blind. That's my main sentence here. Or there's two things that are being said about the subject. One, he is blind, or he is short-sighted. Okay? But now, if we go to the interlinear, we go, oh, wait a minute. Actually, this second one is a participle, but it's still functioning like a verb. All right? It's not functioning like a participle. It's not functioning like an adverb. Now, the next participle, having forgotten, is functioning like an adverb. There's no verb of being in front of it. It's just a regular participle. And as far as that goes, and so we can say it's not, there's no article in front of it, so it's not functioning like a noun. There's no verb of being in front of it, so it's not functioning like a verb. It's our good old regular friendly participles that's functioning like an adverb or an adjective. In this case, I think it's functioning like a verb describing how he is blind. Okay, it'll be something like this. All right, how he is blind. Okay, and how he is being short-sighted. I think it's modifying both of these. Now, okay, so does this diagram make sense? You guys with me? If not, ask, okay? He is blind is the main subject verb. I'll highlight it. Subject verb, and in this case, predicate adjective, right? Blind is an adjective, and there's a verb of being there, so it is describing the subject he, but also being short-sighted is a second description, right? Okay, and so in this case, I would do this just to make it a little more clear. Okay, and this is a reasonable thing to do. He is blind. He is being short-sighted. Okay, in this case, blind is acting like a predicate adjective. In this case, being short-sighted is acting like a regular verb. Okay, because it is a participle, or it is a verb of being plus a participle. Okay, that's why I can say it's acting like a regular verb. Okay? And then this second participle is just modifying is, describing how. How is he blind? How is he being short-sighted? Basically, because he's forgotten his purification from his former sins. That's how he's being blind, how he is blind, or how he's being short-sighted. Okay? You guys following me on this?
Yeah. Tim.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the NAS Greek and English interlinear. Having forgotten is lethen, which is considered a noun here. And then there's another word in parenthesis, forgotten, labon, which is the participle, a verb.
Okay.
It's a aorist participle.
Okay, let me pull up the interlinear so we can all see what you're talking about. Okay, so say that again.
Yeah. Let me. Oh, so there it is. Having received.
Yes, because
Having received forgetful.
yeah,
Okay. Because in the.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because here in the NAS, it's the same order, lethen and labon, but here lethen is having forgotten.
Yeah, that's wrong.
Which is
that's wrong.
Yeah, so that's okay.
Yeah, I think this came up a couple times before, Robbie. I'd recommend just using Bible Hub. The Berean interlinear is, I think, much better. It won't what's the word, mislead you, because lethane is a noun. It just means forgetfulness.
Yeah.
Labon
weird.
is from lambano, which means to receive. That's the verb. So if you look at the interlinear here, notice, I mentioned this to you before. Can you see the case? What case is this noun? It's in the
accusative.
Remember, what did I say about accusative? The accusative
it's
case,
there is connected to a direct object.
yes.
Is that right?
Yep, good. Yeah. Yeah, nominative case in Greek is the subject, typically.
Yeah.
Or predicate noun. Accusative case in the Greek is the direct object or predicate adjective. Notice here, it's in the accusative. That means it's a noun that's a direct object. Direct object of what? Having received.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah. So having received forgetfulness, or it's translated having forgotten. Okay, I think that's okay, but technically that's not what it's literally saying. But that is the semantic idea. Having received forgetfulness, or having forgotten. Okay, I can take that. Having forgotten about, or of, having forgotten about purification, his former purification of sins. Okay, so I probably would encourage you to be wary of that interlinear you're using, because I think this is the third time now it's kind of misled, and that's the thing, with these interlinears, just like translations, they are prone to potentially have errors, and so you just have to be careful. So it's good to it's helpful to find a solid interlinear. I have found this Bible Hub interlinear to be pretty helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Got it.
Because also too, the interlinears, right? They put the parsing there, and I've noticed at times the parsing's wrong. So you can't trust these 100% because sometimes they make mistakes. It's not inerrant and infallible. The original text was, but the interlinear translators aren't always.
Okay.
So in this case, notice here in the text, there's no verb of being in front of having received. Yeah. Okay, so it's not acting like a regular verb. There's no article in front of the participle, so it's not acting like a noun here. So that's why I said it. This one's acting like either an adjective or an adverb, and we have to look at the sentence and see. And I think it's functioning like an adverb.
An adverb.
Or telling us how he is blind or how he is being short-sighted. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's why I diagrammed it this way. Now, let's take, let me go back to how the American Standard Version did it. American Standard had this translation. Okay. Give me a second to dial this thing in here. Oops. This was a question I was asking, and I'm going to change lacketh to lacks. All right, let's get into the 20th century here. He that lacks, and then the that here, it's he who lacks these things. All right, is blind. So far, so good. That's exactly what the New American Standard. He is blind.
Oh,
and now notice.
Oh yeah, there it is.
The difference here. Let me take this out. Here, the ASV. This is the ASV translation, which is the precursor to the New American Standard. But here, notice it has he that lacks. Okay, is blind. Okay. All right, he is blind. Now, with this participle, notice it's no longer he is seeing only what is near. It says he is blind. And now this participle, they've translated as a participle, not as a regular verb. And so this is how you would do it. Seeing only what is near and having forgotten the cleansing. Which cleansing? The cleansing from his old sins. Now notice we have two participles modifying is. How is he blind? One, by seeing only what is near. Two, by having forgotten the cleansing. We've changed. This translation has changed how these what's modifying what in this case.
Yeah.
You guys see the difference?
Yeah.
This is why we're doing this. All right. Now it is subtle. I don't think you're not going to be a heretic if you go with the ASV translation. But there is a slight difference, and that difference will affect how you understand what Peter's saying here and what he's emphasizing. Notice in the first, in the NAS translation, the emphasis is on he is blind, he's being short-sighted. So he's almost repeating, or he's saying he is blind, and then he's adding to that, and he's being short-sighted. So these are two qualities, two characteristics that are being emphasized. And the subordinate idea is this having forgotten his purification. That's subordinate because it's a participle functioning as an adverb in this case. So it's modifying the action or the verb is. It's describing how. But in the ASV
Yeah.
translation, we only have one description. He is blind, with two modifiers, two participle phrases
Right.
that would be describing how he is blind. Okay, so what we've done, it's subtle, but what we've done is we've shifted the focus of the author here a little bit. In the original Greek, you know, in the correctly translated Greek, there's two descriptions being given of the subject. In this case, the subject is he, which refers to anyone who doesn't have the qualities that he's described up in the previous verses. And he gives that person two descriptions, two characteristics.
Yeah.
But the ASV is sort of watered down his focus a little bit by giving it just one characteristic with two subordinating ideas.
Yeah.
Okay. So preaching this passage, you would indicate two characteristics here, right?
Yeah.
But in this, the ASV translation, if that's the one you went with, you would be looking at just one with two modifiers as opposed to one modifier. Okay?
Yeah.
And honestly, we wouldn't know that. And this is why I want you to be careful, because if you had just looked at the interlinear, you would have probably gone the direction of the ASV if you didn't realize there are other ways a participle can function. If we had just stayed in our minds the idea that it's like English, where there's only two ways that a participle functions, we would have seen that participle in the interlinear and said, it's a participle, so it's functioning like this. Right? We would have said it's seeing only what is near. The ASV is the correct one. Well, in reality, that's not true. Now that we know, there is another way that participles can function, and that is they can act sometimes like a regular verb. The NAS and the ESV are closer to the actual. They saw that, and so they translated it appropriately. Okay, now actually they didn't put being in here. That I added that. The NAS is short-sighted, but again, like I said, I like putting being in there because technically it should be there, but secondly, it'll also remind me, this is a participle acting like a regular verb. So this idea of ongoing, see, he's being short-sighted. I think Peter's emphasizing in an ongoing way, not just that he's short-sighted in as a characteristic. It's that he's ongoing. This idea of being short-sighted.
It's like a state.
Yeah, like a state almost.
Tim, is it also when you look at the NAS, it actually makes more sense even in the English, because you're either blind, you can't see anything, or short-sighted, you can see but dimly. Yes. Whereas when you look at the ASV, if you're blind, how can you see only what is near, right? So
yeah, exactly. It now introduces some questions, right? Like what does he mean? If he's saying he's blind, how come he then says he can see something? So yeah, it makes it a little more confusing. That's a good observation.
Wow. Okay.
Everybody.
And Tim.
Yeah, Harris.
Would not the blind part refer to being really an unbeliever, while the short-sighted part would refer to a Christian who has probably become short-sighted, was forgotten his purification?
It could.
And,
study the context and look at what is said in the verses above. you know, that would be more of a theological question. Grammatically,
Yeah.
both are possible, but
Yeah.
you'd have to study the context there and see if that's what it's saying. Because
Yeah.
there
And
is, you know, like in James 1, it talks about the looking in the mirror, and if you're a hearer and not a doer, he talks about sort of a not seeing something. And so again, the question is, that describing a non-believer or believer? You'd have to make the case from the context whether that is what he's saying or not. But that is a possibility, just from the grammar. And that would even be, if that is the case, that would be even stronger reason to make sure we translate this right.
Mhm.
If he is making that distinction, if he's saying that, you know, this guy is blind, that's an unbeliever, and the short-sighted is a believer who's just acting like an unbeliever.
Forgotten.
Yeah. So, but if you
Yeah,
go with the ESV translation, you don't have that option. It would have to be a believer. You wouldn't even have the because he says seeing only what is near. But again, that would be a little more confusing. So yeah, that's
but
a good observation. Yeah.
If we make that distinction, then the having forgotten will just have to refer to those to he who is short-sighted,
Yes.
because only a believer can forget the purification of his former sins. The unbeliever doesn't even know that.
Yes. If that word forgotten means that he once knew it, but just forgot, it could mean something else. That's just the English translation of the word. We'd have to, you know, confirm that by looking at that word and making sure. And I think, if I remember right, all the other translations use that word forgotten. Forgotten. Yeah, they all use forgotten. So that's probably forgotten. Yeah, that's probably the right word to use there then. All right, excellent observations, guys. But you can see how the importance of getting the diagram right, and that relies on the importance of understanding the grammar correctly here. And in this case, this is, again, why I'm exposing you to these Greek participles, because they can make a difference understanding how it's behaving. Is it behaving like an adverb or an adjective? Is it behaving like a noun? Or is it behaving like a regular verb? And in this case, it's behaving like a regular verb because that verb of being is there. Okay, let's look at another example. All right, Ents, I'm going to give this one to you. Can you identify any possible participles in this passage?
Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your toil is not in vain in the Lord. Beloved brethren. Abounding,
Okay,
possible.
that's a possible one. Yep. The abound plus
knowing.
Yep. And then knowing. Those are two possibilities because they follow the ing with the verb. Okay. So let's take a look at the interlinear and see what it reveals. Pastor Robbie, this passage should look very familiar to you.
It does.
It's because of this passage, guys, that we're doing all this stuff on Greek participles. Because Pastor Robbie had a question about it, and opened up this whole issue of the participles can act differently. So, hence, here is the interlinear. See if you can spot where are the participles here.
Participle. Abounding.
There we are. Let's look.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what is it?
And present participle.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, does it have an article in front of it? Do we see a the here?
None, Pastor.
We don't. So it's not likely functioning like a noun. If it were, it'd be like the one who is abounding, but it's not. Now, do we see a verb of being before it?
Steadfast. None, Pastor.
Okay. If you look right before abounding, my cursor, we have immovable, which is an adjective. And before that word, we have, notice there is a verb of being here.
Be, yeah.
Okay. The question is, does that verb of being connect with this participle? Okay. Normally, the verb of being would be right before the participle. But in this case, there's a verb of being, but it's not right before it. It's 2 words away. So the question we need to ask is, well, does that go with this participle? Because if this verb of being does go with it, it's functioning like a regular verb. Now, how do we know if this is the case?
and
Any ideas? Take a look at this verse. What do we see here? Let's incorporate, remember the textual observation skills. What do we have here? Therefore, my brothers, my beloved brothers,
The brothers.
steadfast be, immovable.
Cool.
So it's literally, therefore, my brothers, be steadfast,
Be steadfast,
be immovable,
immovable, and be abounding.
yes, because it's a list. All right, so be this idea. Be steadfast, and that's an adjective. Okay, it's a predicate adjective. Remember, the subject is brothers. Brothers, be steadfast. Brothers, be immovable. Brothers, be abounding. And in this case, abounding's not modifying be. Abounding is connected to be. It's be abounding. It's functioning like a regular verb. And you will find this very often, just like remember the last passage, 2 Peter 1, he is blind, he is being short-sighted. It's a mini list, it's only 2. But there's a predicate adjective, blind, and then you have being short-sighted. Here we have the same pattern. Be steadfast, predicate adjective. Be immovable, predicate adjective. And then we have this abounding. All right, be abounding. So it's technically functioning like a regular verb. And even though the verb of being is not right in front of it, it's still connected to it because it's part of a list. Okay? you will see this, like I said, well, these first two passages, we see this as how it's being used because it's part of a list of things. The first passage in 2 Peter was just two things. He is blind, he's being short-sighted. Here we have three characteristics.
Mm.
Be steadfast, be immovable, be abounding.
Mm.
Okay? In the work of the Lord, always, and then hence, were you correct on that second one? Knowing, is that a participle?
Yes, Pastor.
Yes. And notice what kind of participle is this one?
Perfect.
It's a perfect tense. Ah.
Mm.
I'll come back to that.
Past action.
Yes. Yeah, it's really having known that the toil. So it's something that they've known from the past. So it's taken place before the action in the present of being these things. What is going to motivate that? How do we be steadfast, be immovable, be abounding? Well, it's because we have known that our toil is not in vain. Having that knowledge already is what will motivate us to be those characteristics. Okay? So if I were to diagram this guy, okay, therefore, let me take this verse out. Therefore, my beloved brethren, that's the subject, be steadfast, be immovable, and be always abounding. Now, why did they say always there? If I go back to the interlinear, look at the interlinear. Is there any adverb here modifying abounding? You see anything that says always in here anywhere?
It's after the Lord.
Okay, in the work of the
After
Lord,
in.
yeah, always. Okay, so abounding in the work of the Lord always. Okay? So that's why they put it in the English translation there. Where's my, okay. But again here, this is a participle, always abounding where? In the work, which work? Of the Lord. And then knowing, going to modify be.
Be.
Knowing that your toil is not in vain. Which toil? Your toil in the Lord. Okay, so that is how you will be steadfast, immovable, and be abounding. Okay, again, notice there's one characteristic, 2, 3. All right. It is not. Now, if we had not seen that verb of being here, we'd not seen that, then we could have potentially diagrammed it this way. If we looked at the interlinear and said, oh, there is a participle. All right, and this is how it would have been then. We would have called this A, and this one would be B. Right, both of them describing how.
Yep.
As opposed to here, we just have one. You know, A. Maybe I should put it over here. Easier to see. Okay, do you guys understand what I'm doing here? But with these, so for example,
Yep.
This outline basically would be here 3 characteristics. Or three characteristics commanded. Okay, one is be steadfast. 2,
Mm.
be immovable.
Immovable.
3, be abounding in the work
Abounding.
of the Lord, etc.
Mm.
And then we would have how the motivation,
Mm.
knowing your toil is not in vain.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
that's how I'd preach this. I'd preach first,
Mm.
right? But this is modifier. The motivation's modifying.
Mm.
How do I be steadfast? How do I be immovable? How do I be
Mm.
abounding? Okay, that is from this diagram. But let's
Mm.
say I wasn't aware of this always abounding being a regular verb, and I thought, oh, it's a participle.
Mm.
I would have done it this way. I would have had 2 characteristics.
Mm.
I can't spell. My mind's working faster than I can type. Okay, so I have 2 characteristics, and I'd have 2 motivations.
Mm.
Okay, that's okay. You guys see that? How
Yep.
how my understanding of the participle affects how I see the structure of the passage, which therefore affects how I see the author, what he's doing. Now, Paul is doing the first here. He's commanding 3 characteristics
Yeah.
with 1 motivation.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't recognize that this participle abounding actually is functioning like a regular verb, not a participle,
Mm.
English, not an English participle, then I would have done it this way. 2 characteristics
Mm.
commanded and 2 motivations.
Yeah.
All right. Now, hopefully, Pastor Robbie did it this way. We'll have to see. I have to listen to his sermon and see what he did.
I did.
All right. A plus.
No, the reason also why I asked you about this is not well, first of all, because originally what I had was the second, right?
Yeah.
And because I saw the participle there. But when I began to see the first letter A, even just in the sense, it didn't make as much sense to make it a motivation
Yeah. Yeah.
as much as understanding it as a command. And that's what eventually caused me to ask you about that, because it did this second outline um, did not make sense, seeing the first participle as a motivation.
Yes.
So that's what ultimately led me to ask you.
Yeah. And your instinct was exactly correct. And that instinct is supported by the actual grammar of the sentence, and it's clearer in the Greek here than in the English. All right, guys. Questions, comments? I think again, hopefully again we see that through this example, it just illustrates the power of accurate diagramming, and that, you know, the better the diagram, your diagram will be better if your understanding of the grammar is better, right? I mean, that's going to guide the process here. And so, as Robbie said, you know, that originally it seemed like if we just understand the participles like we learned them initially, which is they only act like adverbs or adjectives, we would have gotten this diagram, because we would have seen the 2 participles. Oh, participle must be subordinate, and it looks like it's subordinate to verb be. So it's describing how. But then as you look at it, how always abounding, how does that help you, motivate you to be steadfast?
Mm.
That sounds like a third thing that he's telling
Mm.
them. And if we had only been operating under the previous understanding of participles, then that would have been a tough one. But
Mm.
here, now knowing that actually, wow, participles can act like these regular verbs. And
Mm.
so this first option is the more correct one.
Mm.
And it's like, yeah,
Mm.
well, that makes sense. Just in what Paul is saying here.
Mm.
And then how you connect it by the context, that word therefore, that connects it back to what Paul has said,
Mm.
right? So that gives you the context for this verse if you're preaching this passage. So you would summarize what he said above, and then based upon that, he gives this command. Based upon what he had said, in the verses prior, right, where he's talking about the resurrection and, the death being swallowed up in victory. That explains why knowing your toil is not in vain. How do we know it's not in vain? Because death will die. Death has been defeated. And so our effort is not in vain because we know ultimately we will be changed. We will not be under death. We will be given, right, an imperishable body that never dies. So our toil is not in vain. So that knowledge from what he says in verses 50 to 57, feeds into this motivation, knowing your toil is not in vain. And so based upon that, oops, I'm in the wrong one. Based upon that, I've got these three commands. All right. You with me? Questions on that? You guys with me? Okay, let's do one more here. The Ephesians 2:5-8 has that phrase. We looked at this before, that you have been saved, and he actually repeats it. You have been saved. Have been saved actually is a participle. Okay, and I'll just do this one real quick, show you from the interlinear. So if we go to the interlinear, and now we're looking at Ephesians 2. Maybe we're looking at Ephesians 2. Okay. And let's just go to verse 8 here. Right? The classic passage, by grace you've been saved. Well, notice something here. Here we are, for by grace, and here's a verb of being, you are, followed by a participle, which is in the perfect tense. Okay, so two things to take note of. One, because we have a verb of being, you are, right before the participle, saved, this is now acting like, this participle is now acting like a regular verb. Okay, that's the first thing. So it's not you are and then participle being saved, modifying that. No, it's you are saved. Are saved is the full verbal idea, regular verb, and it's in the perfect tense. So it's not this idea of you're being saved right now. In the perfect tense, which means it's an action that's taken place in the past with results when?
Present.
In the present.
In the present.
So by grace, and that's why some translations, I think the King James says you are saved. Not in the sense of you're saved right now, but you are in the state of being saved. Based on a past action. You were saved at some point in the past, and the result of that is continuing in the present. But Paul words this as a paraphrastic, as a participle with a verb of being. Okay? He did not use a regular verb, just saying, or did not use like an adjective here. You are saved, where that's not an adjective here. It's actually a participle. So it's a verbal idea. You have been saved, or you are saved. A past action that has results in the present, continuing results in the present. Okay? Now, if you had been just looking at the interlinear and you didn't know about this verb of being thing, and you just saw saved, and you see, wait a minute, this is a participle. How would we translate this? By grace you are, and then having been saved. I mean, it would be very difficult to figure out what that's modifying. But it's not modifying anything because it is acting like a regular verb, and I know that because of this verb of being. Now, in this case, it's not in a list of things, and so the verb of being is right before the participle. But if you had a list here, like you are a Christian, and you are, holy, you are a saint, if there had been a list, then perhaps the verb of being might have been separated from the participle. But in this case, there's no list, so it's right next to it. Okay? Now, let me ask this question. How do we know how to translate these paraphrastic participles? Because if you haven't noticed, we've seen one that is present tense, we've seen an aorist tense, and we've seen now a perfect tense participle connected with a verb of being. How do I translate it? Do I translate it? Well, I won't go through this table in a lot of detail, but I just want you to be aware. How you translate it depends upon the combination of the finite verb of being. This finite verb is the verb of being, and the participle. Okay? So if I have a present tense verb of being and a present tense participle, I translate it as a present tense verb. If I have an imperfect verb of being, present tense, I translate it as imperfect. If I have a future verb of being, a present tense participle, I translate it as future.
Future.
All right. If I have a present tense a verb of being, which was the case in Ephesians 2:8, with a perfect tense participle, I translate it in the perfect tense. You have been saved. And then there's the very rare situation of an imperfect finite verb of being and a perfect participle. All right. And I've got examples of all of these. I'll have them in your notes. I don't know if it's going to be helpful to go through these in a lot of detail. I'm sensing this is kind of, we're on overload right now as far as what we've been covering, but let me just quickly, I'm looking at showing you the wrong one here. Give me a second. Yeah. Okay, this is the one. All right, so in this case, in Colossians, we have constantly bearing fruit. This is a participle, and increasing. And it is in the Greek, there's a verb of being here. Okay. The verb of being is present tense, and the two participles are, and so we translate it as present tense. Is constantly bearing fruit, now, ongoing. Okay. An example of an imperfect verb of being was, in this case, teaching is my participle in this passage. And because it's a imperfect verb of being was in the Greek, even though teaching is present tense, I translate it in the imperfect. He was teaching. Ongoing action in the past. All right. It's not he is teaching them as one having authority. He was teaching them. Okay. That's an example of that form. If I grab another one here, 1 Corinthians. And by the way, let me give credit where credit is due. I got these examples again from this book, from Daniel Wallace's book.
Mounts. Oh,
Wallace. This is the second volume.
Dan Wallace.
Mounts is the basic. I don't know if I can.
Yeah. Okay.
Oops, sorry. This one.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. This is Mounts. And this is a good one. But the next one up, the intermediate sort of, intermediate level is this one by Wallace. Okay. So this is a helpful resource, but you need to have some knowledge of Greek before you dive into that one, or you're going to really hurt your brain. So, but anyway, just want to make sure I'm giving credit here. I got these examples from him. 1 Corinthians 14:9. In this case, will be is my future verb of being, and speaking is a participle in the present tense in Greek, but it's translated as a future tense. You will be speaking into the air. Okay. An example of the present tense verb of being, which isn't shown here. It's in the Greek. I'll just put it in parentheses just so you see it. We have a present tense verb of being in the Greek, and then a perfect tense participle. It's translated in the perfect tense. Have been saved. Action in the past, results ongoing in the present. Okay. And then finally, one of the rare examples, I think there's only a few in the New Testament, an imperfect imperfect verb of being, and then held in bondage is actually the Greek verb here, and it's a participle. So it's translated as a pluperfect. All right. Now, who can tell me pluperfect tense in Greek means what?
Past action that with results that end in the past as well.
Yes. Okay. So here he's saying while we were children, we're held in bondage. So that's an action in the past, and the result is in the past. So the action had an ongoing result, but that result is done. We're no longer in bondage, is the idea. Okay. So again, these are in your notes. They're just some examples of what I was showing you in this table of how would you translate this. Oh no, yeah, here, by the way, this is where give credit to Wallace. Okay. All right. So I did have a summary exercise in Ephesians. Let's see. What do I have this one? Oh, I'm not going to do that. Where I went through Ephesians 2:11 through 22. I'll leave that in your notes, but this passage has a number of participles and all different kinds. For example, this one excluded, that's a participle, but it's a periphrastic connected to were. You were excluded. Were is an imperfect. Excluded is a perfect. So it's a pluperfect. For example, who are called? That was a participle functioning like a noun. Literally the ones being called. By the so-called, another participle functioning like a noun. Then we have excluded, a periphrastic, so it's functioning like a regular verb. We have another periphrastic. We're having no hope. Having is in the present. All right, so I won't go through all of these. I'll just give them in your notes. You can look at them on your own time. But I thought this passage was interesting because there are so many. In fact, I'll just show you. Let me just show you in closing. This passage, New American Standard, Ephesians 2:11. Okay, now I've highlighted in blue the participles. Now notice here. So verse 11, there's two participles. Verse 12, these two participles functioning like regular nouns, sorry. Verse 12, excluded and having, two more participles. In this case, both of them are functioning like they're periphrastics. Okay? In the next verse, verse 13, I've got one participle there, and that participle is functioning like an adjective, literally you being far off have been brought near. Verse 14, two more. Who made, technically this is a participle functioning like a noun, the one who made. And then a second one, who broke down, the one who broke down. Again, functioning like a noun. Verse 15, two participles. Verse 16, one participle. Verse 17, a participle. And in this case, it's literally, and he, having come, he preached peace. Verse 20, two parts. Verse 21. So we've got, in these 13 verses, 14 participles. Some acting like adverbs, sometimes acting like adjectives, some acting like nouns, and some acting like verbs. Okay? We can identify the ones acting like nouns by looking for the article in front of them. Typically, it will have that. We can identify the ones acting like regular verbs by looking for that verb of being. Okay? All right. I think that's enough. I've tortured you enough this morning. But I'll leave that exercise for you. You can look at in the notes and see all the details of all that. But I thought this passage was very interesting because of the number of participles and the different variety in the way they're used. We see all four functions here. It's an interesting passage, but it's not unusual, especially for Paul. It's not unusual. You'll see lots of participles, Greek participles, that if you were looking at the English translation, half of them you wouldn't even know were participles. And you know, I think so. Hopefully, this will be a little helpful for you. You can be a little bit more precise as you look at the interlinear and see, you know, see these things popping out. All right, and then in the notes, I have a diagram. I diagram this passage as well, so you can kind of see how those participles behave within the diagram, and understanding that by understanding them in the correct way is how they're functioning. You can see then what that looks like in the diagram. Okay. All right. Final questions or comments?
I just remembered Mel's first book. Enough is enough.
More than enough. I've had enough. All right, we'll end the painful journey in English grammar, and in this case, Greek grammar, this morning, and focus our attention on doing some diagramming in the future and looking at narratives and starting to review that genre. If you guys have a passage that you're teaching or that you're interested in that you want to diagram together, I'd much rather do that than just come up with ones on my own. I don't mind, but if it can be helpful and we can all look at it and work on it together, that'd be great. Just why don't you send it to me? You know, if you have one you want to do, send it to me, message me, let me know. I can take a look at it ahead of time. That would allow me to prepare a little bit for you rather than doing stuff on the fly. But if I don't hear from any of you guys, you know, then I'll just come up with my own for that. Okay. But let's start that next week. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're from grammar, we're going to be looking at different genres now, like narrative, you said earlier.
Yeah, I was thinking of doing narrative next week. We looked at poetry and kind of, you know, worked through the poetic analysis part. We could talk about some other topics like you know, review word studies and things like that too, if you'd rather do that.
Yeah. Well, maybe somewhere down the road we could review the prophetic genre.
Sure. Yeah.
That one's tough. That one's really tough. So
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, if you don't mind, why don't we tackle narrative first, at least just the narrative analysis portion.
Yeah.
And then we can tackle the prophetic. Do an example from that and kind of work through that analysis.
Great.
All right. Okay.
All right.
Manny, would you like to close us in prayer?
Let's pray. Our Father in heaven,